my grandfather acquired a 5,000 acre block, and his eldest son-in-law got a 5,000 block over there. So in 1904, for a very short time, between the two men, we owned 10,000 acres. Now, you've just driven down a lovely tarmac road to get here.
Yes.
That tarmac road was the boundary between those two 5,000 acre blocks.
And you paid completely nothing for it, just the surveyor's fee.
Yes, I believe that is true. Let's be honest. It was a fight for survival on both sides. We wanted to keep our land, but quite a lot of that land had been acquired illegally or through coercion, through force, and that had to be accounted for. What we were portrayed was that the Mau Mau were very violent, and that was true. Okay, one of the things in warfare, you try to denigrate the enemy. You remember in Rwanda, they talked about the enemy as cockroaches. Do you remember that? To try and make it that if you killed them, it wasn't an issue. You know, where's the aerosol can? You know, you're just spraying cockroaches. Okay. And so what I do remember as a child is that they produced horror books. So you would get a publication of 10 or 15 pages, quite big, with nothing but atrocities of people that have been chopped up by the Mau Mau. So people, heads cut off, animals, legs cut off, children murdered in their beds, and this was thrown at us. The violence on both sides has to be acknowledged. We can't go back 120 years and change history. So what we've got to do, we've got to take responsibility. I couldn't change what my father and his people did, but at least I can go to somebody and say, Paul Sana, I want you to forgive me for what they did.
Mike, I think part of your apology should be give back this land. It's almost 5,000 acres thereabout, being owned by one person in a country where majority of the people don't even own a plot. Have you had to have that conversation and asked yourself, I'm sitting in this large chunk of land that we paid no penny for, should we give it back, or what do we do with it? And what do you think is the right thing to do? Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of LNS. My name is Lynn Ngugi, and today's conversation has brought me to a very different location. I'm about to have a conversation with someone who was born in Kenya over 8 years ago. And truthfully, there are so many questions I have, and I know he's going to provide a couple of answers to them. And I hope at the end of this show, we can all be able to learn and relearn some of the things that have been taught unto us. I want to say thank you so much for always being active participants of our work. Through you guys, we've been able to bring you a lot of thought-provoking conversations, and I honestly can't thank you enough. I also want to thank our partners at TapTapSend for always coming through. So in case you're watching this maybe from diaspora, why don't you use them to send money to your loved ones back at home? And if you use my promo code Lynn, of course, you're going to get a bonus on the figures appearing on your screen. And also to say thank you to my team for always putting this work together. I've said you get to see me in front of the camera, but it takes an entire team to be able to put this work together. And now, of course, without further ado, please allow me to let my guest today introduce himself so that we can be able to get this conversation started. Hi.
Hi, Lynn. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, my name is Mike Harries, and as Lynn said, I was born in Kenya a rather long time ago, in fact, 86 years ago.
Whoa.
I was born in Upper Hill, Nairobi, which of course didn't have many buildings in it, probably had a few buffaloes and things there as well. I was born in a very small hospital called the Maya Cabri, and there's a story in aviation for some of you that may know that she died in a plane crash with my cousin, and that's why the hospital was named after her. Apart from being educated in Britain at secondary school and university, I've lived my entire life in Kenya. Thank you.
It's really nice to have you and to have this conversation with you. But before we even get started, what do you think we intend to achieve with having this conversation? At the end of the day, what would you want our audience to learn through your story?
I think history is important. History is very important for knowing where we've come from and why we came from it and what lessons we've learnt, the mistakes that were made, the good things that were done, so that we can move forward in a more informed way. So I think history is important. And what I love about this is, as we discussed, Lynn, earlier, I've spent 8 years writing the family history, but these days, these young guys that are helping you with this team, it's the phones, the podcasts and stuff that are the really things that grab them. And I think it's very important for the younger people to know history. And as you know, I've been involved in reconciliation over the Mau Mau and things, and this is so important, that these things which have been sort of kept under the carpet rather until recently need to be brought out and dealt with and forgiven and moved on. Okay? As I was telling you earlier, one of my friends, his father was a home guard and his mother was part of the struggle. So these stories need to be told and dealt with and brought into the light and moved on with forgiveness and a new vision for our country.
You are a Kenyan, rightfully so. Have you ever felt otherwise? Have people ever made you feel like you don't belong here? Considering you were born here, you've lived most of your life here, do you ever get that feeling that you are not maybe wanted here sometimes?
Not so much these days, but as we went through, and as you know, with 120 years of history, I'm third generation. I have great-grandchildren, so we now got 6 generations that have lived on this farm. Inevitably, as we went through the process of going from Mau Mau to independence to the new government under German, obviously there were some people that were not happy with us. The past of the struggle was still very painful. So they saw me as guilty because I was white. Okay, and so yes, I can remember soon after I got my Kenyan passport, we were accused of being paper citizens. Okay, and we had to say, well, no. When I took out my British passport in '65, my Kenyan passport in '65, I gave up my British passport, and I don't want it back. I've been a Kenyan since '65, and I want to die a Kenyan. Okay, so, but I can understand, as we're dealing with reconciliation and healing, obviously there are some people that still have a problem with that on both sides, of course. Okay, so yeah, there are times when it hasn't been easy, but I think more recently that is diminished.
All right. Well, I love that you've said, you know, this is a whole 120 years of history that we're about to listen to. So probably maybe from a place you're very comfortable in, could you walk me through your journey? Why did your family come here? And by the time they were settling here, what are the lies and the truth they had been told about this country?
So originally what happened was they built the railway from Mombasa to Kisumu, and it was I think completed in about 1901. Okay, so now you need people to develop the railway, to be able to use the railway for as passengers and as goods. Okay, and obviously in 1901 there was not a lot of indigenous business. The business was local in the individual tribes. So basically there was then a policy, and there was a guy called Russell Bowker, who was a South African who'd been through the Boer War, came to Kenya privately in 1901, 1902, met, you remember in those days there was no colony, it was the Imperial British East Africa Company. So obviously he met some guys that were part of that leadership, and they said, look, please go back to South Africa and try and persuade as many white farmers or business people to come and invest in Kenya. And the Boer War had been really horrible. Okay, and my grandfather had fought through it, and I think he just said, I've had enough of this tribal conflict. I want to get out of here. So when he heard about Kenya, he said, right, so he came up with one of my father was the youngest of 8. So the number 3 son came up here with the father.
Yeah.
They spent 6 weeks walking. They came through Kiambu here, which is now Kiambu. They came through here in 1904, walked up towards Nyeri, and then they went across the Aberdares. Just imagine in 1904, they must have found some honey hunters or some, people to guide them. So they went over the Aberdares and then down to Naivasha, where they got onto the railway. and then they jumped on the railway and then got off at different places. I assume they went as far as Kisumu, but I don't actually know that for a fact. But I would imagine they probably did. And then 6 weeks later, they got back to Nairobi. And what was interesting is that when they arrived in 1904, there wasn't enough room, there wasn't enough hotel space. You can imagine Nairobi in 1904 was almost a shanty town. So they had to live in tents outside in a little forest there. So they came back and they said to the government, we like the land where we're sitting here talking to you today. Yeah. Now, in those days, initially, this sadly changed, and we know that, and that's part of the history. Initially, the first white people that came here early were told, you can't dispossess indigenous people. If there are people living there, watcha, you can't go there, okay? So we're having this discussion earlier as to when did the Kikuyus cross the Chania River?
Yes.
1870, whatever, we're not quite sure, okay? They came across the river, assimilated with the Wanderoba or the Ngumba, bought land for beehives, and started developing this area of what we now call Kiambu. But then rinderpest and smallpox came in towards the end of the 19th century and killed hundreds and thousands of people and thousands of livestock. So I think that's accounted for the fact that when Granddad came through here, there was no visible people that had actually lived here. There were no old maniatos or kraals or whatever. So that's why the government said, yes, you can acquire a piece of land here. Of course, we had the Kikuyus to the west. We had the Maasais to the north and the Kambas to the east, okay? But this area, as far as I'm led to believe by my family, there was no actual people residing here. And when you come from another country, agriculture is very specific to climate, to soils, to crops and pests and diseases. And they tried all sorts of stuff, Lynn. And it was tough because we didn't come here with much money. We didn't come rich. And many of the people that came later were rich and famous from Britain and even, part of the hierarchy in Britain. We didn't come that way. We came out of a war. We'd lost the farm, locusts, all sorts of stuff. So we came here not with much money. Where we were able to survive is because we acquired quite a large piece of land, we were able to sell that to settlers coming in later. So we were able to get a bit of money from selling by subdividing our land and selling. So that's what kept us going. But in the early days, they tried all sorts. They tried wheat, they tried potatoes. And one thing that actually clicked was ostrich feathers.
Oh, really?
That was one of the first businesses that my granddad did, because the women in Europe liked to wear ostrich feathers in all their, to make them maridadi, make them beautiful, And so we ended up with 200 or 300 ostriches. And then somebody in high society in Britain said, ostrich farming is cruel because the birds suffer when they pull the feathers out. I mean, of course, you don't pull the feathers out. You only sell the ones that molt. So, it was a complete false reason for, but then they closed the business down. Now, Lynn, what do you do with 200 or 300 ostriches? So they took them about 5 or 10 miles down the road. And they all came back.
Whoa, they came back home.
All came back home.
Okay.
So finally they had to take them right down past Donny Sabuk. And finally the ostriches said, okay, we won't come back. Okay. But then again, to survive, they had to hunt. The people in the area loved buffalo skins for shields and for beds, okay, for making beds and for shields. So my father and his brothers would often spend weeks out just hunting buffalo. Shooting the buffalo. The local people loved the fat and the meat and the skins. So that was another way that we survived.
Okay.
And then
allow me to touch on two areas. Yeah. Number one, the issue of land acquisition.
Yeah.
How many acres did your parent, or how many acres did your generation, how many acres did they inherit? And how was the process of land acquisition? Yeah. And do you have an idea of how much the land was bought for?
Details there are a little bit scratchy, but what we understand was that we didn't actually have to buy the land. Pardon me. We had to have it surveyed. Okay, so we had to pay a survey fee. It was rupees and stuff in those days, so please, but it wasn't a lot of money, okay? We my grandfather acquired a 5,000 acre block, and his eldest son-in-law got a 5,000 block over there. So in 1904, for a very short time, between the two men, we owned 10,000 acres. Now, you've just driven down a lovely tarmac road to get here.
Yes.
That tarmac road was the boundary between those two 5,000 acre blocks.
And you paid completely nothing for it, just the surveyor's fee.
Yes, I believe that is true.
All right. So when this land is being given to your parents, your grandparents, who gives it to them? Is it the colonial government?
Yes.
So they say, this is our land. They choose who to give the land to.
They called it crown land. So basically, all the land belonged to the crown.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the crown is giving that land to us. Yeah, but very complicated and strange situation. Yes.
All right.
I agree.
Okay. The other issue I want to touch on is sports hunting. You've said they loved hunting, you know, buffaloes.
Yeah.
The local people loved the meat, and then for them, they loved the skin.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on sports hunting, considering you're coming in a land where people exist or coexist with animals, right? What are your thoughts about sports hunting?
I didn't expect that, Lynn, but I actually have quite strong views on this.
Tell me.
And I don't want to take too long on it.
No worries.
But I believe that sport hunting is a good use of land. Okay, I think what has been proven in South Africa is that where local, the people that own the land also have a responsibility for the wild animals there. Things flourish. But see, now in Kenya, all farmers, right now, I'm working with KWS because we're totally overrun with monkeys. Of course, monkeys eat avocados and all sorts of other things, okay? So we're working with KWS now to trap these monkeys. In fact, I think we're sending another 5 or 6 today, as we speak, to go on holiday to Donnisabuk, okay? Now, I think that sport hunting, when controlled, this is the aspect. Human greed comes in, okay? But where it's legislated and controlled together with the authorities. When we used to hunt back in the Masai Mara, when I was a child and later, the hunting was done under the control of the government, okay? The local game warden would know which species were endangered and which species were not. And just to tell you how things were so different, when we used to go to the Mara in 1945, 46, when I was sort of 7, 8, 9 years old, the famous game warden there, who was called Temple Borum, would say, guys, if you see a leopard, please shoot it. Because there were just so many leopards. The Maasais were coming to him and crying, these wretched leopards are eating all our goats. So when we came, he'd say to my dad, Bob's, look, I'm sorry, we got too many leopards. So if you come across a leopard, even if you don't have a license for it, because we had to have licenses. And the interesting thing is that the local council, the indigenous people that owned that land where we hunted, had to benefit from what we shot. So not only did we pay a license to the government, when we shot that buffalo or that impala for nyama choma, for roast meat, we had to pay the local people a fee, which went to the local council. So they benefited from what we did. Anyway, it's a very complicated issue, but I believe that part of the answer to wildlife conservation is giving the owners of the land rights on the wildlife. Because then if you're a stock farmer and you have a herd of dairy cows, you're not going to decimate them. You're going to build them up. So if you're allowed to benefit from your wildlife, you're going to nurture it and protect it. Okay, and before hunting was banned totally in 1977, the hunters would bid for a block. The country was divided into blocks, okay? And if you won that block for 2 years, you'd pay a large fee to the government, and then you would be the only person that could control the hunting in that area, okay? So now, your people, even if you didn't have people in the camp hunting, your people were already there all the time. So if poachers came in, straight away they would know there was something going on and there would be a control.
All right.
So in those days, the hunters were part of the anti-poaching program because the poachers were killing the animals for which they were responsible for. So it was a win-win situation.
For both parties.
For both, yeah.
I asked you that because I've had the privilege to host the authors of one of the best-selling books. It's called The Big Conservation Lie. That's Mordecai and Wambaria. And one of the things they say is the whole tourism, conservation, and all this talk does not benefit the local person. It benefits the tourist. It benefits the governments. It benefits people who have their own intentions. What do you think? Do you think actually the conservation in this whole tourism talk has nothing to do with us as Africans, but everything to do with the tourists who come displace our people in the name of conservation? What are your thoughts?
I mean, we're getting a little bit away from history, but this in a sense is part of history.
Yes.
But I believe that, you know, it's just the human greed. Tourism can bring in an awful lot of money for the people that are funding the camps and have the Land Rovers and whatever, okay? And that's okay. Business is good. Tourism's good. But when it becomes too much, I mean, you go to the Masai Mara now, and if you see a cheetah or something, you can have 50 vehicles around you, okay? And, you know, we brought mass tourism in, which is completely denigrating the environment, okay? And the other issue, seeing as we go on to this, and I didn't expect to be talking about this, is in the cry for conservation, the bushmeat trade is decimating Kenya's small wildlife. When did you last see a zebra when you drove to Naivasha? A few years ago, every time you drove to Naivasha, you'd find the zebras together with the cows.
A lot of them.
Just walking down the road. When did you last see a zebra there? I was hearing from a friend of mine in one of the ranches down near the coast. The other day they caught a motorbike with 50 dead dik-diks on the back of the motorbike. 50 dead dik-diks in one night on one motorbike. So the bushmeat trade is, I don't know what's happened within the last few months or years, but the bushmeat trade, if it continues uncontrolled, and I think you got me onto this. A lot of the indigenous ranches up in the dry areas of Laikipia and stuff, for a while, were able to host camps to shoot birds. You know, and a lot of people from Europe and America just love the camping experience, to go out with a shotgun, shoot 3 or 4 guinea fowl or sandgrass, and then come back and have their dinner of that. That was stopped. And those guys were making a lot of money, because these people were paying a lot of money to be able to live in a tented camp in the middle of the wilderness with lions and whatever around, go and shoot a few wild birds for the dinner and pay heavy money for it. Now, when that income was lost to those guys, what did they do, Lynn? They went and started killing the dik-diks and stuff to sell the meat. Sorry, you got me onto an issue.
No, that's
anyway,
okay. Yeah, it's important. They are familiar with the conversation. Our audience who are watching, they're very familiar with the conservation conversation. But I did not mean to get you off track. We can go back to history. Your grandparents, they've landed here in Kenya. They have these massive or huge tracts of land. Would you walk us through that? What happens next?
Well, as I said, to survive, they started subdividing.
Yeah.
And I believe that most of the early plots were 500 acres. So then I assume my granddad could sell about 10 plots or something. Okay. So he obviously sold, and that's what enabled us to survive, because the other ways of agriculture were not earning much money. Then the guy that had the other 5,000 acres over there was an army colonel called Herbert Cowie. And he was the father, you're talking about conservation, he was the father of Colonel Mervyn Cowie, who started the whole national park system in Kenya in the late 40s. And there's another huge story there. Okay, so when he went to South Africa on a trip in about 1910, he came back with some pineapples, okay? And they tried to plant them somewhere. We had a property in Parklands in those days. They tried to plant them there, and they didn't seem to do very well. So they're almost about to throw them away when my granny, and of course in those days, Lynn, you've just driven down Kibaki's beautiful superhighway. You've come across our road, which has now been beautifully tarmac. In those days, it took Granny 3 days to go shopping in Nairobi. One with a donkey pulling a cart. Okay? So she would set out to shop in Nairobi, and they'd have to camp. Of course, there wasn't a Kiambu. It was just bush. So they had to camp halfway along, or 2/3 of the way along, and spend the night beside the track. There wasn't a road, a track. And then they'd get to Nairobi, to whatever shops there were, the next day. So 1.5 days traveling to get there. And of course, when you're camping at night, there's a possibility that the lion might eat your donkey. Now, if the lion eats your donkey, how are you going to get to do your shopping the next day?
That's a hard one.
So that was quite tough. So anyway, she brought the pineapples back and planted them here, and they did very well. And it enabled my father and the rest of the family to develop pineapples. We did very well during the First and Second World Wars because we provided fruit for the army. Okay. But those few plants that came from South Africa enabled my father to start Kenya.Through. Now, everybody thinks of Del Monte, which now has this huge factory at Thika, as you know. But that was actually started by my dad and some partners in the late 1940s, and it was called Kenya.Through Limited. We sold that national business because in those days we were now growing pineapples through estates as well as smallholder growers. So then my father and his partners sold that company to to Del Monte in 1965.
So your family introduced pineapples to Kenya?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Then they sold it now to Del Monte.
Yes, in 1965 they needed a big expansion. We didn't have the capital to do that, so Del Monte came in, built a huge, great new canning factory, and my father, and this has become a bit of a political thing. My father, there was an international company called Anglo-French Sisal, which owned several thousand acres around Thika, and they went bankrupt. Okay, so my father and his partners did an organization with the government to lease that land to plant pineapples. Okay, and that was what enabled Del Monte to come in, because now Del Monte said, if we're going to come in, and this was actually, of course, approved by Mr. Kenyatta, because now we're after independence. Okay, so the Kenyatta government approved that Del Monte would have the lease of that land to come in with that massive investment. That's become a bit of a hot potato since, but it was a proper deal where the lease of that bankrupt Sisal estate was taken over by Del Monte with the authority and the permission of Mr. Kenyatta's government.
How much land are we talking about?
It was several, please don't quote me on this, but I think it was more than 2,000 acres, but I can't remember, sorry. But it was a large, and I mean, you've seen it. It goes from the main road going up to Nyeri towards Donyasabuk. That whole area was planted up with pineapples.
All right. So let's go back, because now we are talking post-independence, right? So your family is settling in. Could you walk me through the relationship between you and the indigenous people, the locals? And also, can you walk me through what you remember that happened during the Mau Mau era?
Well, we'll be here all day. But no, what initially, because right from the beginning, whether it was ostriches or whatever, we needed labor.
Yes.
And as I said, I believe that there were no people living close, right where we were. So we actually had to go west, up towards the forest, to require and ask people to come and work for us. So we were bringing people from the Kikuyu land up in the forest to the west of us to be employed with us. Okay. And obviously, and in those days, if you are trying to run a business, if you don't treat your people well, then it's not going to work very well. Okay, so I mean, I grew up as a child in the 40s. Okay, and I can remember having good relations as a child with the people. I used to run around the farm. Absolutely freely, okay, as a child. And I believe that my parents and grandparents treated their people well. I know that when they used to go hunting, there was a huge demand to go with the people to do the hunt, because in those days, a lot of the stuff had to be carried by people. You remember that a lot of the early movement of goods from Mombasa to Uganda was done with porters, carrying loads from Mombasa to Uganda. It was a business that people, and I have a few stories on that used to have wagon trains, but of people, thousands of people carrying goods on their heads from Mombasa to Uganda. Okay, so when my father and his brothers used to go hunting, they would have a very basic T-model Ford or something, but they would take probably 40 or 50 people on foot. I mean, we'd be going 20, 30 miles that way towards Ukambani. But there was no shortage of volunteers because they could eat as much meat as they could. So, yeah, so I of course, we'll get to the Mau Mau, and there were very just reasons for that struggle. And it's a very complicated process. But up until then, I think the relationships were good. I don't know if that does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I love that. What did you think of the locals? Because I think this is now where different races come in, right? You are taught to believe you're white, this person is black. How was your interaction? Did you see color? Were you taught about color? Were you taught about, stay away, don't interact, don't... What were you taught?
No, I wasn't taught not to interact. But of course, the policy of the government was racial in terms of schools and entertainment things, and we had to live with that. But in terms of what went on here, I think the relationships were good. But the whole system was racial in terms of where people could live, what they could grow, later on whether they could be members of this club or whatever. So yeah, there was a racial system there, but not everybody was racial in their attitudes to the indigenous people.
But what did the colonial government teach you about my people? Because history teaches us that we were the evil people. They came because they needed to fix something in us. What did the government teach you about my people, the black people?
I don't think I personally was not attacked by that sort of anti-propaganda. I'm an interesting generation because I've had to face when Kenyatta made that speech to the white farmers in October 1963, which is why I'm sitting here talking to you today, because my father said, let's believe that man and let's do that.
Yes.
He said something about the wrongs that the whites had done against the blacks. And he also talked, and I've got that speech in my book, he also talked about the wrongs that the blacks had done against the whites. He said, none of us are perfect, none of us are angels, we've all done something wrong, okay? What I didn't realize as a kid growing up in the 40s, and to a certain extent the 50s, is how much wrong had been done. Because I also came under the sort of story that the white guys, yeah, they had to use a bit of force, but basically it was in your best interests, and and we brought Christianity and we brought education, and I sort of bought into that narrative that the imperial colonial experiment was more positive than negative. I've now had to reverse that and find that it was more negative than positive, and I've had to deal with that. And as you know, part of the testimony you know about me is that recently at a Mau Mau conference, I had to go to one of the people that we detained and kneel at his feet and ask for his forgiveness. Okay. So, but I wasn't actually, I knew you guys were different, but that wasn't a huge problem to me. Okay. But I wasn't sort of targeted with these people are evil or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the problem with Christianity, as we were talking briefly before, I think many of the missionaries came in with the right attitudes. It may have been that the colonial government thought they could be part of the scheme to, I mean, the sort of narrative is they gave us the Bible and stole our land. Okay, that's the sort of, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Okay,
Yes.
I think a lot of the missionaries came here with right intentions, but I think they tried to impose Western Christianity on people whose culture was completely different. And as I said to you earlier, I think Jesus would have done it a bit more differently. I think it'd have been much more compassionate and much more able to work in with your different traditions. Okay, not leave them unchanged, but to, you know, not to sort of come in and make laws. If you want to be a leader, then you've got to get rid of these other 4 wives or something. I mean, that was absolute nonsense.
Do you think Africans needed Christianity from the word go?
Well, basically, as a Christian, I believe everybody needs Christianity. But I believe that sometimes it's been misused, okay? And to be frank with you, I'm ashamed even today as to how, even in Kenya today, forgive me for saying this, because I'm a member of a church, is that sometimes Christianity has become more part of the problem, more part of the solution. Because we have compromised our faith so much that sometimes we're not a challenge, we're not a positive influence, we're not even a positive example of how God wants people to live. So yeah, I think for Christianity is people developing a relationship with God, and that to me, it doesn't matter what color you are. That's something important.
And let me touch a bit on the Mau Mau. As you mentioned, what did your family think of the Mau Mau? What was the truth and what was the lie in the Mau Mau narrative?
I mean, let's be faced, Lynn. Let's be honest. It was a fight for survival on both sides. Okay. We wanted to keep our land, but quite a lot of that land had been acquired illegally or through coercion, through force. Okay, and that had to be accounted for. One of the tragedies, when the Kikuyus started expanding the population here in central Kenya, they started moving onto white farms in the Rift Valley and further west. And initially, it was a very win-win situation. The white settlers back in the teens and 20s and even up to the 30s needed labor. Okay, so they would allow a Kikuyu or a Kamba or a family to come and be squatters on their land. And they would give them quite a large area where they could have their livestock. And there were initially no limitations on how many cows you could have. So the white guy would say, look, I own this 500 acres. It's bush. I need help to clear it. Because in those days, there were hardly any tractors. Okay? Everything was hand labor. So they'd bring in the Kikuyus who were moving out of overpopulated Central. They'd bring them onto the farm, and for years it worked very well because the workers thrived. They had their own cattle, they had their own crops, and they either agreed certain number of days labor or loads of manure for fertilizer or cutting firewood. There was you can live there, you can have your cows here, you can grow your crops here, but now as the landowner, we do this deal in terms of labor or whatever. And it worked very well. Now what happened was, they now start getting tractors. And so now the white guy looks at this Kenyan guy doing very well in the corner of his block. He's got his house there, he's got his crops, he's got his animals there, he's doing very well. And he thinks, well, I could use that land. And now I've got a tractor. I don't need him. I don't need so many hands. And so they pushed them out. Tens of thousands of people. And of course, they couldn't come back to Kikuyu land because they'd left there. So they ended up going to the towns and stuff. And that was a good seed bed for the Mau Mau when the war was over. And of course, the other aspect, I mean, we're dealing with a hugely problem, and this is just a few minutes, but so many of the indigenous Kenyans fought in the Second World War and in the First World War. And they didn't benefit from that. So they came back, having seen the white man, the super white man, die and cry and, you know, shed his blood out in Libya or Burma or wherever it was. And so they see he wasn't some sort of super person. He died and cried like everybody else, okay? Many of them died themselves in the fight. They then came back here with military training to find that they were almost dispossessed. And so now you have the people that were displaced from the farms in Rift Valley, another place, coming to the cities. And now you have these guys that have had military training, okay? Now find that, and quite a lot of it was because they had fought for the whites. When they went back to their home areas, they were not so, and they found that their actual farms had actually been taken over by someone else in their absence. So there was that complication as well. Okay. But that was now a seedbed for the Mau Mau in 1950.
Someone might ask, because history teaches us that the reason Mau Mau were fighting was because they needed to reclaim their land, right? The reason why your grandparents would settle here is because the government has told them that no one exists in that land. They died of smallpox or whatever. Do you think that's actually the truth? Do you think the land you're in had never been occupied before?
No, I said I'm very clear that the land was occupied.
But the people died.
But I mean, I cannot swear. But my grandfather, through my father, because my grandfather, I never met him. He died in 1921. I wasn't born until 1938. But my father told me, and I believe him, I can't swear, but I think he was telling me the truth, is that when we actually got this land, there was no visible habitation here. So we actually had to go west to get people to come and try and get them to work here on the farm. So that's all I can say.
And do you believe that's the truth?
Yeah, I believe it could be true, because even a lot of my Kikuyu friends that were involved with their families, and I told you the story of my one Kikuyu friend who actually bought land from the Wanderobos, his great-grandfather, or whatever it was, back in 1880 or whatever. And then he does recognize that there was rinderpest and smallpox, which decimated so many people. But his place, I think, is down near Kiambu. And he actually then was pushed out by the whites. So yes, that happened. I am hoping that my grandfather was not part of that displacing people. But very soon, when more and more white people came in, then of course, don't forget, when they built the railway from Mombasa to Kisumu, they took over 1 mile on either side as where indigenous people couldn't live. So that probably was part of what led to the Nandi revolution, which I think was in 1905, when a police officer from the British side murdered Chief Koitalel. I think that was part of the issue, is that 1 mile on either side of the railway, sorry guys, if you live there, get out.
As someone who is writing a book and talking to us about history, do you believe it can be distorted to fit a narrative?
Absolutely. Because look, if in 1995, I was sitting over there, exactly in this situation. I had a film crew from Britain who came to talk to me about what was it like being a teenager in the Mau Mau. That was, you're asking me questions. The question was that the lady sitting there from Britain, her name was Elizabeth Dobson. I don't know why I remember that. She said, now Mike, now here's the camera, okay? The lights are on. Now Mike, tell us, what was it like being a teenager in the Mau Mau? Right, you're on, talk. When I later listened to that, at the time I was in a prayer group with a guy called Zach Gakunju, who was an assistant minister under Daniel Moy. He was part of a Christian group that I was members of back in the 1980s. And he had converted to Christianity in Manyani. It's a long story. I won't bore you with that. and it ended up that we were in the same group. And he died quite a number of years ago. And when I was writing this story, I got onto his two daughters and his son. And I said, look, I knew your dad, we prayed together for a number of years. Did he write anything about his time in the Mau Mau? Okay. And they said no. But what had happened previously is that when I was interviewed in about 1995, sitting over there, I said, if you're going to interview me as a Mzungu, you've got to interview my brother, Kakunju, who was on the other side. Okay. And when I went to the daughters a few years back, when I started writing the book, I said, did Dad write anything? They said, no, but he was part of a documentary, which we can give you. And I said, well, I think I know about that because I organized that. But I hadn't seen it since I'd done it. So when they sent me the thing on YouTube,
yes,
I listened to it. And Lynn, the first three things I said, two I exaggerated and one I lied about. And I'm thinking, I mean, that's not the way I try and run my life. But when you've got a cameraman with this guy here, and you saying, what was it like? The tendency is to exaggerate, to make it sound more exciting. And I think one of the things that the people that are writing the history of the Mau Mau, I think the people that caused the violence try to diminish what they did. They try to downplay what they did. The people that suffered the violence try to ongeza, they try to increase, okay? Because that's human nature. You try and defend yourself, okay? So I think when we're trying to deal with oral history, somehow the truth is somewhere in between. I got into trouble with some of my retired police colleagues, and of course, to serve in the Mau Mau, you've got to be in your 90s, okay? But when they heard I was writing a book, they basically, I think they asked, are you trying to bring out some of the things that we did wrong, okay? And I'm saying, look, I'm as much as is possible, with the help of two other Kikuyu friends that are helping me with this chapter on the Mau Mau, to just find out, as far as possible, what actually happened. What was the truth, okay? Now, it's going to be very difficult to get that, but at least that's what we're trying to do, okay? To just try and find out what, as far as possible, what really happened. That's what I'm trying to do with what I'm writing.
So let me take you back. There are no harsh cameras here, lights and all that, right? So Mike, what was it like growing as a teenager during the Mau Mau? What's the greatest lie that has been told to you about the Mau Mau that you are now finding out this was just a lie? This is the lie I've been telling myself all along.
I don't think, because you see, what we were portrayed was that the Mau Mau were very violent. And that was true, okay? One of the things in warfare, you try to denigrate the enemy. You remember in Rwanda, they talked about the enemy as cockroaches. Do you remember that? To try and make it that if you killed them, it wasn't an issue. You know, where's the aerosol can? You know, you're just spraying cockroaches. Okay. And so what I do remember as a child is that they produced horror books. So you would get a publication of 10 or 15 pages, quite big, with nothing but atrocities of people that have been chopped up by the Mau Mau. So people, heads cut off, animals, legs cut off, children murdered in their beds. And this was thrown at us, okay? So the violence on both sides has to be acknowledged, okay? The fact that the Mau Mau killed Christians because of their faith, that they refused to take the oath because of their faith, that has to be faced. So the fact that the Mau Mau were violent, the lie that I then faced was that we were the good guys in that. The whites were the good guys. And it's only relatively recently that, as I said earlier, going back to Kenyatta's thing that I mentioned, is how much wrong things we had done in that struggle. You know, I was not aware of the torturing. I was not aware of what happened in the detention camps. I was not aware of what happened in the home guard posts. But later, as I've been writing my story, I've become aware, okay? But our own personal history was a complete tragedy, absolute tragedy. Because we're now living in this house that my father built during the Mau, which is, as I said to you, I don't understand why he built this house. But where I was brought up is that a little mud and thatch house, which is behind us now. It's got mabati on it now, and there's a story there. But when we were there, I grew up there as a child. In 1939 or 1940, my father had to go and fight. He was in the army. He was told that he's now having to go to Ethiopia to fight the Italians. So he was having dinner with my mum in that little mud house there behind us. And he'd asked one of the servants to come with him to help him. You know, he's all fighting a war, so you need someone to wash your shirts and, you know, whatever. And he asked one of the servants to come with him. So while they're having dinner, and my father was having to leave at 4 o'clock the next morning to go to Ngugi, where the army was getting ready to drive north. So one of the servants comes to the table and says, "Boss, I understand we're going to fight some white man's war." My dad says, "Yeah, we're probably fighting Italians." And he said, I'm going to have nothing to do with that. I don't want to fight any white man's war. So my dad said, "Well, you can't force a guy to go to war." He said, "Well, don't worry, I'll find a guy in Ngugi who wants a job." I said, "Not an issue, don't worry." So they just went on with the meal. A few minutes later, my mother's cook, whose name was Wanjoro, came in and said, "Boss, you're going to war tomorrow." So my dad said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, I understand my colleague refuses to go." My dad said, "Yes, that's okay. I can't force." He said, "I'm going to go with you." And my father spoke the Kikuyu of the old Wazes, the real Kikuyu. So they were Yakitian Kikuyu. And I can't remember, well, of course I wasn't, I was there, but I was 1.5 years old. But I think the conversation went something like this. "Boss, if there's a war on, men have got to do what men have got to do." Because my dad said, "You've got a wife and 2 kids, 20 miles up the road. I'm leaving at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning." He said, "I'm going to be there tomorrow." Amazing. So, you know, you talked about the relationships we had with our staff. What does that tell you? So now they go to war. 3 years fighting the Italians. So in war, there's a real bonding. When you've been through 3 years of war with a guy, you kind of bonded. Forget about what colors you are. Okay, you bonded. War. I mean, I was in the army, but I didn't actually have to fight. But even that experience bonded me with the boys that I was with. So when they came back, that guy Wanjoro became one of my dad's right-hand men. They worked very closely, and he was basically like my father's nyapara for the farm. Okay, and I used to run around with him as a kid. You know, because he was my dad's friend. The emergencies, well, now in about 1950, Father noticed that the relationship was starting to get, you know, because they were able to talk in Kikuyu, and he noticed that things were getting a little bit difficult. And finally, Wanjoro said, "I want to retire. I want to be paid and whatever." And in those days, a domestic servant had to have a book that he carried with him with the reference from the previous employer. So if somebody came to your house, Lynn, to be a cook in those days, they would come with a book to show how good a cook they were for the people he worked to before. And I have that book in my office now. And there my father has written an absolutely glowing tribute to Wanjoro, just saying this guy is just the best. But obviously, as time elapsed, he suddenly discovered that something, and to cut a very long story short, he'd taken the loyalty oath of the Mau Mau. So because my father had a good relationship with the Kikuyu Wazes, okay, he met with them and said, "Look, what's happened with Wanjoro?" And they said, "Well, look, he's taken one of the Mau Mau oaths." And my dad said, "Do you think there's any chance that we could bring him back?" And they said, "No, we don't think that's possible." Okay, so he's gone. My father now joins the police reserve, and as I shared with you, I worked in the police reserve in police headquarters for 10 years. Okay, recently from 2003 to, sorry, 1993 to 2004. So this is recent history. But my father was a member of the police reserve back at the beginning, and most of the white farmers were conscripted into the police reserve because many of them had army training, of course, from the war. Okay, so we've got this Indirugu River, which is our southern boundary. And my father would be given some trip flares, and that was one of the routes for the Mau Mau to come down to get food, to get money, and to do raids. So my father would put a trip flare there, and we had our own home guard post, which is interestingly on the piece of land owned by Peter Kenyatta's daughter, Lucy Nyakabi, who's now my friend, as I said. She owns the farm just here, which used to belong to my cousin. We had our own police post there with a drawbridge and a moat, and everything. And there was a little pen in the middle where if my father captured a Mau Mau through his police operations here on the farm, they would lock them up there, waiting for the official police to come in and take them away for interrogation. So because my father would speak Kikuyu, in the morning he'd go there with a packet of cigarettes and sit and just talk with the guy in Kikuyu, saying, what's going on? And 3 weeks earlier, 5 Mau Maus had been coming down the valley, and they'd been flushed by a British Army patrol. And in those days, when the British Army came in, of course, none of them could speak Swahili or Kikuyu. So they either had to have a Mzungu who spoke one of the local languages, or they had to have a guy from the King's African Rifles that spoke the languages. So when they flushed this gang coming down the valley, they ran into a cave. And the guy that could speak the language, I don't know if he was white or black, but it doesn't matter, just shouted, "Look, give yourselves up. You're in a cave, you can't go anywhere." And a shot came out through the mouth of the kid. It didn't hit anybody. So the army officer threw in a hand grenade. And a hand grenade in a cave kills everybody. But of course, nobody at that stage knew who these people were. Okay, my father was not part of that operation, but because it was on the next door farm, he knew that 5 Mau Maus had died in an army operation just up there, but a couple of kilometers away from where we're sitting. So now, some weeks later, he captures this Mau Mau guy down in the valley there with a trip flare. So he brings him back, sitting there having a cup of tea with him in the morning. Now, talking about morale, what's going on, just chatting in Kikuyu. And the guy said, "Do you know the gang that was killed a few weeks ago?" My dad said, "Of course." He said, "Well, do you know who that was?" My God, "Of course I don't know." He said, "That was Wanjoro, your man from the war. We took him." And one of the Mau Mau O's says that if you and 4 other people are told to go and kill a white man, and you fail to do it, that oath will kill you. It's one of the earlier Mau Mau O's, and you can check it. I think you know that, but you can check it. So they'd told him to do that. So they'd sent him with 4 other people, interestingly, 1 woman and 3 men, to come and kill us as a family. And this was a guy that I used to run around behind as my mate when I was a kid. Even down in that valley, we'd go fishing, or just running about, because he was my dad's mate. Okay, and now here he is coming to kill us under oath. And the guy just said, and just to make sure that he didn't fail, we took one of his daughters and we said, "If you don't kill that white man, your daughter will die." So that's part of the human tragedy, Lynn, of this Mau Mau, which affected us. And that's why I'm saying I'm so surprised that my father built this rather nice house in the midst of that. So he must have been trying to make a statement that in spite of that, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know. He never talked to me about how in the midst of the Mau Mau, he moved out of the mud and the thatched house and built this house. I don't understand what that was all about.
Does that hurt you, that he tried to take your family out?
Well, no, because I just think, I'm thinking as he walks down the valley, did he really want to do what he was being told to do? And of course, we don't know that. I'm sad that a guy who I thought was our family friend. So I'm not angry. I'm very sad that this whole situation that involved the trying to get back the land which was unjustly taken in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, resulted in that sort of fracture of human relationships, was something that saddens me and still does.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there are instances where, in all fairness, land was never unjustly taken? Do you think there's anyone who settles here that can say, we took this land and we did not hurt anyone in the process?
Well, as I said, I'm hoping that's true of my family. I can't swear that on the Bible, okay? But that's the narrative that I've grown up with. And I know that in some cases, in other areas, it was true, okay? That there was, because I mean, the population in 1900 in Kenya, I mean, you guys on Google can find it out, but it's probably just a few million, and this is a huge country. So there was an awful lot of land.
But Kenyans would say it's our land, whether it's empty or not, it's our land.
Yeah.
They would say, we don't go to Britain and check how much free land they have and think we can occupy that. That's their land.
Yeah.
So someone would rightfully say, whether it's empty or not, it's our land.
Yeah, but you've got to go back a little bit, Lynn, in history, because all the tribes acknowledge that they came from some other place. Kikuyus have not always lived in Kenya. They came from the Congo or somewhere.
Yeah.
And they came and they overtook, they either displaced weaker people or they took over land that may have had people in it before. So migration has always been part and parcel, okay? And as you know, there was a lot of fighting between the indigenous people over grazing, over water, over cattle, over stuff. So, you know, conflict over land is not something new. So, yes, I have to acknowledge that in 1904, but you see, it becomes complicated. You know, you live in a huge country and it's sparse. Some other people come in, and they're more advanced. They come in with equipment and everything, and they take over. But that's sort of part of human history. I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying that that's part of human history.
How do we correct that? Because it can be part of history, but it's not good history.
You know,
how do we correct that?
I mean, it's very difficult to unbreak an egg. Okay, I think we have to accept what has happened in the past and forgive and move on, okay? Because we cannot undo the past. I cannot go back, and if my grandfather did acquire this area unjustly and he did push people off here, which I don't believe was the truth, but I can't completely say it wasn't, I can't undo that. We can't go back 120 years and change history. So what we've got to do, we've got to take responsibility. Like with Joseph Muthea at that conference the other day, I couldn't change what my father and his people did to the Kikuyu people. I can't change that. But at least I can go to somebody and say, Paul Esana, I want you to forgive me for what they did, and let's move on together. So I think we have to accept one of the things that's coming up at the Commonwealth Conference with King Charles the other day was this question of reparations, okay? But then if you go back before, see, the problem with the colonial experiment is that it now becomes recorded, whereas what happened between the year 1000 and the year 1800, what happened there with the slave trade and who fought who and who killed who and who did what, it's not recorded, okay? But human greed and whatever is part and parcel of life. So I think what we have to do, I think we do have to take some responsibility for the sins of our fathers, okay? Whether that means doling out huge amounts of money. There was a guy, I think, from one of the the West Indies, I heard him on the BBC just a few days ago. And he said, look, we're not asking for vast amounts of money. What we want, first of all, is a proper apology. And I did that I not only did ask apology to Joseph Mather the other day, asked him for forgiveness. Okay. We need that to be dealt with. And that will take care of a lot of it. But now we can deal with a much closer cooperation, possibly a bit of debt forgiveness, okay, to help us with the debt. And now a much closer working together so that we can acquire the benefits of technology easier and cheaper than having to fight for it on the sort of commercial market. And I thought that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But we can't unscramble the eggs.
Let's look at the facts a little bit. I can't quite remember his name, but when the commissioner from British was sent to Kenya to investigate and write a report on the atrocities of the British people in this country, there were so many cases, rape, murder, especially on the Kenyans, the African person, black person, right? When we try to equate that and say the Mau Mau were violent, do you think the Mau Mau had a choice? Do you think they actually had a choice? Because I'm looking at a scenario where they know this is our land and we need to get back this land. They are looking at the divide and rule method that is happening in their country. They want to protect their land. The reports, the facts are there. When the British gave an apology to the Kenyan people, they actually said, if I'm right, that these were not the sins of the present government. These are the sins of the colonial government, excluding London and excluding the whole of that from this mess. Do you think that was a proper apology? So 2 questions. Do you think the Mau Mau had a choice? And when we are talking about an apology, can we have an apology that lacks in action?
No, as I said, no, I don't think we can. And I think, do you remember that when, on October the 7th, was it, when the Palestinians came across and murdered 1,200 Israelis, the head of the United Nations, what's his name? Guterres or something? He said that was not in isolation. That was the result of something. And of course, that got the Israelis extremely angry. And of course, he was talking about the West Bank, the settlements, the denial of Palestinian rights and stuff. And I think we're in the same situation. The Mau Mau became violent because they saw that was the only way. And they were dealing with the violence of what had been perpetrated on their people previously. So yes, they did become brutal, but that was not in isolation. It was part of the history of what they had suffered themselves. And as I've said, one of the things I'm having to deal with now, as a person who possibly saw the colonial imperial experiment through slightly rose-tinted glasses, because I saw education, I saw agriculture, I saw, social development and health and all this sort of stuff. I saw the positives. What I'm now having to come to terms with is that there was a lot of price paid by the local people for that. And yes, I think it would be good for, I'm getting out of my area of expertise here, but I think what I'm told, and this may be wrong, that if King Charles came up and made some even stronger apology, it would immediately open a whole thing to financial reparations. That may be what's stopping this. But I think there's a middle road. That there has been an apology in Parliament by the Foreign Secretaries, I don't know, 10 years ago, whenever it was, I can't remember this. There has been a sort of an apology and a sort of acknowledgement. They paid money to 5,000 alleged freedom fighters. But I think that was a bit murky, because I think some people that should have got the money didn't, and some people who shouldn't have got the money did. But anyway, that's life, isn't it? So yeah, I think more needs to be done, and I think we do have to face the fact that there was more violence there than has been. And I once was acquainted with a police officer that worked in the colonial times, and he told me that part of his job was to look at the records, the Kenyan records, and see what should be destroyed, what should be taken to Britain, and what should be left behind. And I think where the British do need to be held to account is that even now they've released an awful lot of the records of which they took to Britain, but even now there's some that are still very, very difficult. You talk to historians like David Anderson, and he'll tell you that there's still some documents they won't let me see. And that's, it's more than 60 years after the event. Mm-hmm. So if there are things there that they don't want to see, then we must ask why. Why are they not divulging some other documents that are still being kept in some secret location? So yeah, it's a complicated issue, but an awful lot more needs to be done.
Good. There's a film that's going on right now. It's dubbed Battle for Laikipia. Yeah. And I don't want to give the details. I'm sure you can catch the film because I don't want to expose someone's creative work. But 40% of the land in Laikipia is owned by settlers, and land being a very sensitive issue. When someone says, Mike, I think part of your apology should be give back this land. It's almost 5,000 acres thereabout, being owned by one person in a country where majority of the people don't even own a plot. Have you had to have that conversation and asked yourself, I'm sitting in this large chunk of land that we paid no penny for, should we give it back, or what do we do with it? And what do you think is the right thing to do?
As a family, we went through this very issue. When my father died in 1970, my sister and I, she sadly died some years ago, we inherited 3 farms. This farm here, 500 acres. Next
5,000?
farm, 500 acres. Mm-hmm. Next farm, 300 acres. Up until the early 70s, the Kenyatta dynasty had left coffee farmers very much in peace, because he realized, you may not remember or know that in 1963, coffee was the #1 foreign exchange earner for Kenya. So basically, Jomo said, for God's sake, let's not mess the coffee up. There's many other areas, there was the 1 million acre buyout in the Rift Valley and wherever, which the British government, and then later on, I think it was another 300,000 acres that was bought out and indigenous people were able to settle. I think Jomo said, look, let's not mess the coffee estates right now. So it was only in the early 70s that moves were made to buy out the white farmers around us, okay? And so suddenly we found ourselves being the only white people left. And interestingly enough, most of the farms were bought by the Kenyatta family and their associates, okay? The first black commissioner of police, who later became a friend when he retired, he used to own the farm over there. Other members of the family own stuff around us. So I went to my mother, who was of course living in this house, and I said, look, I don't think it's right for us as a family to own 1,300 acres of land, okay? So I'm suggesting that we sell 2 farms and try and keep this home farm of 500 acres. So we put it out in 74 that we were happy to sell. And VP Karanja came to see us. Maina Wanjigi came to see us, both saying, I understand you want to sell your farm. And then President Kenyatta announced from Gatundu that Harries could only sell to a cooperative of 3,000 people. And helpfully, he told us which cooperative we should sell to. The new Gatundu Mixed Farmers. So it actually went very well. We sold our 800 acres of land to 3,000 Kenyans. And Jomo had said, for God's sake, don't mess up the farm. Keep it running as a profitable coffee estate to bring in foreign exchange, and then the 3,000 people can get the dividends, like the Mzungu used to get. That was the plan. In 1977, they bought the farm in 1975. 1977, the price of coffee went up about 400%. And we made very good money as coffee farmers. Mm-hmm. The new Gatundu mix farmers made so much money from the coffee estate that they'd taken over from us that they paid off the entire bank loan that the Standard Bank had lent them to buy the farm in the first place. Because when they came to buy the farm, they had to borrow 90% from the bank, and they only were able to contribute 10%. So they bought the farm in 75. By 77, 2 years, they paid off the entire loan from the profits of the coffee. They then told the coffee management agency to get out, because when you owed money to the bank, you had to, the management of your farm was under the bank. So if you owed them, you know, X million shillings, and you were paying that debt back, they insisted that the management had to come under their bank. So basically the bank ran the farm on behalf of the people that had borrowed the money. So now, with so much money being made in 77, they paid off the whole. So now they could tell the bank to get out, and they could run the farm themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, please forgive me, but this is what actually happened. We sold the farm in 75. They paid off the loan in 77. In 1991, I get a phone call just before my mother died from the chairman of the new Gatundu Mix Farmers. Mm-hmm. He said, "Mike, can I come with a few directors to see you?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." And we actually had tea with my mother where we're sitting here right now. The directors came in here, my mum prepared tea for them. And so I said, what's happening? And they said, "We bankrupted your farm. Would you please buy it back?" And they actually wanted 20 or 30 times more, because, you know, the devaluation of you remember back in 1970, it was, don't quote me on this, but it was 16 shillings to the pound or something, okay? By 1991, so we sold the farm for X million shillings in 1975. When they came back in 1991, they wanted nearly 30 times more. And of course, there was no way we had that sort of money. And of course, the farm was bankrupt. So the irrigation equipment had been vandalized. Okay, the coffee was derelict. Okay, so we said, "Sorry, we can't buy our farm back." Okay, so that's just one sad history of trying to take and help. And sadly, it wasn't too much to do with the 3,000 members. They were the ones that were spitting, mm-hmm. angry, because they'd bought into it, and they never made any money. So what happened was, they then got involved in an illegal subdivision, because under those days, you weren't allowed to subdivide big estates into small parcels of land. Anyway, the shareholders were so angry with the directors that they subdivided 600 acres of our farm, because they sold 200 acres to a flower farm, which is still there today, doing very well, employing hundreds and hundreds of people. The 600 acres, they chopped up into quarter-acre plots. So if you drive past our coffee farm now, as you've just done, as you drove in, you'll just find small houses. Okay, and some of them sold 4 or 5, quarter-acre plots, and now you've got some people that have built some quite nice houses. Some middle-income people have got some quite nice houses there. Mm-hmm. So I'm not doing that judgmentally, but I'm just telling you a history of what happened to us, mm-hmm. in terms of trying to get rid of some of the land that we owned.
Mm-hmm. If someone asks, why sell what you did not buy in the first place, what do you say? Because now you're selling it, but you never bought it in the first place. Why not give it to the state? Why not surrender? Why not buy something for yourself and leave the rest to the state?
Yeah, I mean, that again is a tough one, because that was my grandfather, okay? And this is, 70 years down the road or something. So, I don't know whether that would have worked in other aspects. I don't know, okay?
Okay, but can I ask a general question?
Yeah.
What clauses protects settlers? What clauses or what part of the Constitution protects you people? Or do you feel sometimes scared that this might go someday? What protects you, apart from the speech Kenyatta gave? What else legally protects you to still be here and own this land?
Well, the fact that I have a title deed, okay, and of course, because I've subdivided some of the land, the title deed that I hold for this piece of land, because now we actually only own 160 acres of that original farm, because of the collapse of coffee in 2000, when we nearly lost the farm, because I spent 40 years of my life trying to develop wind pumps for pumping water to try and stop children going blind because of trachoma in the desert. And that's another long story that I won't bore you with. We had to sell bits of land, so we're only left with 160 acres left currently. So the fact that, whether we should have given it back, I don't know, because I'm third generation down the line. And the fact that the title deed that I have right now is a title deed in the name of my company issued by Mr. Ruto's government, okay, or Mr. Uhuru's government, to say that I'm an owner of that land. Legally, I'm an owner of that land. Now, if you feel that needs to be taken from me, without any compensation, okay, that's an opinion.
Do you feel, considering you were born here, you've lived most of your life here, you are Kenyan, I'm Kenyan, we are both Kenyans, right? Do you feel that sometimes people might view you as not Kenyan enough because of the privileges that you might enjoy?
Yeah, but what about your privileges? What about, one of the issues why some people think Mr. Kenyatta should not have been president of Kenya was because basically he replaced the white elite with the black elite. And you're part of that, okay? So
I'm part of the black elite?
Yes.
How?
Well, you're part of the more wealthy people in Kenya.
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I represent the story of every Kenyan. You start from scratch. You fight your way up to the top.
Yeah.
You don't find someone giving you this much land and telling you, stick around. Yeah. Mine is a Kenyan story. Sorry to say. I'm not an elite. If you ask me about my net worth.
Yeah, but let me finish.
Yes.
Let you finish.
Yeah.
Perhaps elite was not the right word. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm trying to, forgive me if this is coming out wrong.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make you see what a lot of people have to deal with, right? I don't represent the elite. I personally have to hustle to own a piece of land.
Yeah.
We didn't have anything given to us. And maybe this is why some people might feel like, why would Mike have this much land if I have nothing? We are having a very honest conversation here. Yeah. So I feel sometimes there's always that anger towards, why am I driving in this large piece of land where else?
In quite a nice car.
Yeah, of course. It's the normal Kenyan story.
Yeah.
You work hard, you get yourself a piece of land, you get yourself a car, you run a company. If I go back, I don't have almost 160 acres to my name or to my family's name or to my grandparents' name or to my great-great-parents' name, right? But you get to have that. And I'm trying to have a very honest conversation with you. How would that make now someone sitting on this side feel? Do you acknowledge their feelings and say, I might be enjoying some privileges that you guys don't get to enjoy?
Yeah, but Yes, I mean, you're getting into quite complicated areas here, but I mean, I look at what my family has done for this country. I look at the fact that I tore up my British passport to commit myself to this country. My father came here very poor. He took a piece of land which possibly didn't have anybody living on it at the time. He brought pineapples to Kenya and developed it as a national crop that benefited tens of thousands of people. In 1947, a family member brought macadamia nuts to Kenya, which my father developed into a national crop, which benefited tens of thousands of smallholders in Eastern and Central Province. Okay, we were then closed down before that was completed, basically because the director of agriculture, who was a guy called Machayo, back in 1973, after I took over the macadamia business from my father, said, "We don't want white people involved in this job, so get out." And my father developed it from scratch. Okay, so all I'm saying, Lynn, is that I think we paid our dues. We can't unscramble the eggs, but I think we've committed ourselves to this country. I've spent my life in this country. I'm going to die as a Kenyan. I don't know what more I can do to prove my loyalty to this country. I've worked for the government. I've worked in the police. I've worked as a volunteer pilot, flying sick people all over Turkana for 40 years at my own expense. Okay, what more do I have to do to prove that I'm a Kenyan? The fact that I still have 160 acres of land is, yeah, that's part of the story. But do you think that I should just say, okay, forget what I've done for Kenya, what my family's done for Kenya, and I just hand this over to somebody and go to the coast, or what? I mean, what would you do in my position?
I love the fact that we get to acknowledge a normal Kenyan doesn't get to enjoy certain privileges, because I always say the journey to reconciliation starts with honesty. I represent over 1 million subscribers on our platform, and I know for sure they don't get to enjoy certain privileges that we get to see with settlers. So I don't know what I would do if I were in your position, but I'm really interested in knowing or understanding, what do you think has been the impact of your family's presence in the Kenyan soil? What do you look back and you are proud of and say, my family did this to the Republic of Kenya?
Haven't I told you a bit about that?
No, of course the pineapple. I just want to know extensively some other things that you look back and as a family you say, this is beautiful, we did good.
Well, as I said, we brought two crops to this country that have become of national importance, that have benefited tens of thousands of people. How many people are growing macadamia nuts today?
So
How many people are benefiting from pineapples today?
So many. But you do agree if I say, you do agree.
I don't have the numbers.
Yeah, but you do agree if someone would actually say we didn't need them in the first place because we had our own crops, we had our own. You do agree why someone would try and reason that way?
Yeah, but I mean, then you're just completely, negating development, okay? The fact that you can make an awful lot more money from pineapples or macadamias than growing maize, so you can have more money to send your kids to school, I mean, is that a bad thing?
No, it's a beautiful thing, yeah. But I'm saying at what cost?
Okay. Well, I mean, as I said, Lynn, I can't unscramble the eggs, okay? I have to live here with the history. I believe that my family has proven its loyalty to this country, okay? As a Christian, I do not bribe. That has cost me monstrous amounts of money, okay? It's one of the main reasons I've had to close my windmill business down. That windmill business, I started that in 1972. My mother bought an aeroplane for me. And I didn't want to use that aeroplane as part of my privileged status. To say, Lynn, I can fly you to Kilaguni for lunch, let's look at some elephants and I'll bring you back for tea, which I could do, okay? If I'd had my aeroplane, I could have said, when you came here, Lynn, let's go to Killigreeny Lodge for lunch. I'll treat you to lunch, and we'll come back for tea. I could have done that a few years ago. So I said to myself, what can I do with this aeroplane that will benefit people? And so I heard about a small Christian mission called Sight by Wings. Now that tells you aeroplanes being used to help people that have eye problems. I found the mission headquarters in Nairobi, and I said, look, flying is all about experience, the number of hours, the number of years that you've been a pilot, because flying is very complicated. And the more time you have in an airplane, the better you become, okay? So I said, I'm still a fairly immature pilot, but I have some bush flying experience. Because when you're doing this sort of work, you're not landing on tarmac airstrips with runways that go from here to there. You're landing in the bush. You're landing on bits of sand. You're landing in Mandera, Moyale, Elwak, all over the place. Very funny airstrips. So you have to have some experience. So I said, do you need a backup? I said, well, of course we do. Aeroplanes get problems. Pilots get problems. Sometimes we have more doctors, because what they did was they'd bring Christian surgeons from Britain mostly, sometimes from Germany, who would volunteer their time free. They'd even pay their own airfares. We would put them into these small aeroplanes and we'd fly them to Lodwar, Elwak, Moyale, Mandera, Wajir, and even places in between that you've never even heard of, okay? And we would be doing nothing but eye surgery. Mostly, of course, we were dealing with government hospitals. We had a program where we would have our surgeons there, 2 or 3 times a year, okay, with Lodwar or Mandera or Moyale or whatever it was. We'd have a relationship with the medical officer in charge of the hospital. And this is in the 1970s, 73, 74, 75, 76 is when I was doing this. So I went to them and I said, look, I'm running a coffee estate. I employ 300 people. I have 6 managers. I'm superfluous. They can run the farm without me. I will volunteer 30 days a year free, including the aircraft and my skills as they were. All you do is weka mafuta. You just put the fuel in. And I'll avail myself 30 days a year, free. Just call me. And in an emergency, you can call me at 8 o'clock tonight and say, the aeroplane in Lodwar has got a problem. Could you please go and pick the doctors up now and take them to Elwak? Yes. Fuel up, Lodwar, pick them up, take them to Elwak. Okay? I did that for 4 years, free. Okay? During the course of the discussions with the surgeons, I'm just a taxi driver, but you get very emotionally involved in what's going on. You see people coming in blind, and now I'm half blind, so I know a bit about that. You see people coming in blind, you see the surgeons operating. I was there with the aerosol can trying to keep the flies away. And then I'd say, surgeon, one of the big things I'm dealing with is trachoma. So I said, what the heck's trachoma? They said, well, basically it's a hygiene thing. If the child has all that dirt around the eyes, okay, flies can lay eggs in that dirt and a little worm hatches out and it goes into the eye and it turns your eyelashes inside out and you go very painfully and very slowly blind. So I said, silly question. If those kids had enough water in the desert to wash their faces, they wouldn't get trachoma. They said, well, of course not. If the kid can wash his face, there's nowhere for the flies to lay their eggs. So I came back and thought, wow. And as I said, with the farm that we sold over there, in 1977, with what land we had left, because we'd sold 250 acres of coffee to the Kiambu people, we made good money. I didn't need a new wife. I didn't need a new car. I didn't need a new farm. I had this money in the bank. So I remembered that issue. So I said, now how can I provide water in remote areas to stop Kenyan children going blind because they don't have enough water to wash their face? And I came up with machines that pump water with wind. And I decided not to buy them from South Africa or Australia or Mexico or somewhere. I would make them here on this Kenyan farm with Kenyan boys and girls. I spent 40 years of my life doing that. We put 350 windmills up in Kenya, supplying clean water for tens of thousands of people, so they could now get. I worked with one Manyatta just south of Lodwar. And of course, being a bushman, I could land on a bit of flat sand anywhere. It's not quite like a helicopter, but you know. So I went into this, and there was a very famous, I mean, for want of a better term, witch doctor or seer or whatever you like to call him in the Turkana thing. And I got to befriend him, and I said, what's your biggest issue? And he said, well, of course, water. And one time I flew in there with my plane, and I walked to the Manyatta, and they had ceremonially killed a goat for me to roast it under a large Turkana ceremony. Okay, so now as I'm about to eat this roast goat, which interestingly they had roasted with its skin on in the fire. So they actually left the skin on and roasted it in the fire. That was the way they did it. So now I'm about to eat this unfortunate goat, and of course the wife couldn't speak Swahili, and the kid comes to me and he says, Mike, because of course they knew me, Mum says white people want to wash their hands before they eat food. So I said, where did this water come from? And he said, Mum walked 10 kilometers during the night to get that water for you in a 20-litre can. So she was 4 or 5 hours walking during the night to have water for you to wash your hands. And I said, this white man is not going to wash his hands to eat food today. I had the privilege, a few months later, of putting a windmill 50 meters from that lady's house. And she walks 50 meters to get as much clean water as she can use. Okay? And that all started with me donating 30 days a year of my time to try and help doctors do eye surgery on Kenyans. We charge 40 shillings an operation for surgeons from Europe that you would pay £5,000 for to have the same operation. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
of course, I'm grateful for your service. I wouldn't take that away from you. It takes a lot for someone to commit so many years, you know, trying to help here and there. But I feel that's the problem we have as Africans, because we've made the world think we need saving. If you ask me whose problem it is that there's no water in Turkana, that's the government's problem. Because this is the narrative, and this is why people talk about a white savior complex, where someone thinks they need to save Africans from their problems. And I feel we should actually put more pressure onto the government to do what's right for its people. If we are talking about surgery, if we are talking about water, if we are talking about amenities, that is their job. Up to now, I don't know why we have so many documentaries being made about saving the African man or saving the African woman. I don't know why we document drought. I don't know why we tell people that, you know, we have drought left, right, and center. We have so much water that we don't know how to collect. And I feel as much as what you've done is amazing, it should be upon the government to make sure that its people.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So what did you want me to do when I'm watching these people up in Lodwar?
That's why I've said, I can't, Mike.
Let me finish.
Go on.
Am I to say, sorry guys, that's not my problem, get the government to do it?
I feel like your voice would have been important in telling the government to do what they need to do.
And what do you think I did with 10 years well, 6 years on President Kibaki's advisory council? What do you think I've done for my life?
Right.
But there are times when you have to do something yourself.
Yes.
If I see children going blind, if I see kids going blind, I can't just sit back and say, it's the government, I'm not going to do anything. No, you get emotionally involved. So now, am I getting into trouble with you because I try to meet a need of a brother? And the Bible says to me, if you see someone in need, if you don't help, then you're guilty. So am I now being judged for the fact that I actually went and did something which the government should have done?
If
Please
we go
spare
back,
me that.
If we go back, I just say they appreciate you for your services. What I'm not trying to do with this show is plant the seed to the African people that we need saving from having enough water. We need saving from, medical these things should be provided to by our government. So I'm not going to say, I said that's wonderful, but if you ask me, I don't want it to sound like this is a favor that should be accorded to a human being, especially in instances where the government need to play that role. I'm sorry if it came out any wrong.
I'm 100% with you. I mean, in this prayer group that I'm been a member of for 30 years, we often talk about better government, okay? And as I've said, I worked in the Kenyan police headquarters for 10 years as a reserve superintendent. I used to tell my police officers when I was lecturing them in Kiganja or wherever, I have a dream, and hopefully you allow me to have a dream.
Go on.
That one day, Martin Luther King, okay?
Yes.
I have a dream. That one day, I will be in a position where I can be proud to say I once served the Kenyan police. And in the 10 years I worked in Kenya police headquarters, I did everything I could, unpaid, because I was a reserve officer for 10 years. I asked my daughters what it cost the farm to have me working for the police on and off for 10 years at my expense, okay? To try and do my bit. And unfortunately, I'm 86. I'm not sure that I will live long enough to see a Kenyan police that I can say I am proud of. One of the reasons Kibaki put some of us on the National Economic and Social Council, which, as you know, came up with Vision 2030, was to try and hold his government accountable. So, Lynn, we've tried to do it.
Good.
The fact that we have failed doesn't mean to say that we don't have to take some initiative to help where we can.
And I do what I can. We've taken initiatives as a platform to help where we can. I was actually sharing in what you've said and saying we shouldn't let our voices, we shouldn't be quiet. While we are doing what we can, we need to keep the government accountable. We need to hold them accountable. So I believe you've done that. So kudos, that's a good thing.
It's just that, I'm accused of being the white savior. The fact that I happen to be white is not my problem. And
That's
I'm a
not
Kenyan.
what I said, Mike.
I've been a Kenyan since '63. Okay.
That's not what I said. I was talking about the white savior complex, because it's a thing. It happens factually. So it happens where Africa has been portrayed as a continent that needs saving. Where we need to tell the people that you can have solutions for yourself as a continent. And I'm a big advocate. I advocate for us having our own solutions. It shouldn't take someone to be able to tell us your child's eye shouldn't be dirty. It shouldn't take us years to have water in Turkana. That's actually all I'm trying to say.
Well, thank you. We're on the same page there.
Yeah.
But it was just being difficult, being lobbed, being put together with the people that are sort of, in a sense, being judged for trying to do something about it where the government has failed. I will continue to do that even today in my small way.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. In our journey towards reconciliation, what are some of the 3 key things we need to collectively consider as a people? I
have mentioned this a little bit before. We've got to deal with the past. We've got to bring it out into the open, okay? Which is what I've been trying to do with the Mau Mau story, and you know a little bit about that, okay? We've got to go back to Mr. Kenyatta. This whole struggle has got to be more balanced. At the moment, it's very difficult to hear anything positive about what white people did in Kenya, okay? But there is some positive stuff there, okay? And it's very difficult to have anything that the indigenous people may have done something wrong, okay? Now, Gaddo, the famous cartoonist, is a friend of mine, okay? And I think it may have been him, but at independence, there were 4 things that Jomo Kenyatta was fighting. Remind me, poverty, disease. There were 4 things. Come on, guys, you're Kenyans. Poverty, disease, I don't know. But there were 4 main things that Kenyatta came, what my government is going to do. And 50 years after independence, Gaddo produced exactly the same 4 things. And we're still struggling for them 50 years later. Now, I'm sorry, you can't blame me for that.
No.
Okay? So all I'm saying is that the government has got to be held accountable. And one of the jokes that we have in this prayer group is, because I'm the oldest member of the group, being 86, they said, Mike's always saying, what is going to happen to Kenya to make it come to where we know we could be? Because we have such potential with our people, with our climate, with everything. God has given us so much, and yet we don't seem to have benefited from it. And we've said, well, we look to the church. That hasn't done very well.
Not at all.
We've looked to the media.
Not
and I mean,
at all.
some of the people, and let's be faced, there are some people in the church, Ngugi, let's remember Bishop Ngugi.
Yeah.
Let's remember the other heroes that have tried, okay? And I'm glad that the voice of the church is now being stirred up a little bit, thank God, okay? Then the media, and we know there's some very courageous boys and girls being tear-gassed and stuff, trying to bring out the truth. Yeah. Thank God for that. What started to make a change? The grandchildren, the Gen Zs, okay? They're the ones that started to say to their parents, you guys are part of the problem. And what you've done is affecting us. Now, if you're not going to sort it, we're going to sort it. And I just thank God for that. And I just hope that by the grace of God that can continue, because everything else seems to have failed. Okay?
But there's hope. You don't believe there's hope?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do. But, and I think the hope a lot. I mean, whether what the Gen Zs have done has woken up the parents, whether they're prepared to not turn a blind eye to corruption.
Yeah.
Okay? Because now the kids are saying, look, you're part of the problem. You put up with this for the last 50 years. We're fed up with it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that message getting through now? I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I mean, have you got kids?
No.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, wait, when they say, Mum, are you part of the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Or not? Well, you're all youngsters here, but I mean, you know, the kids are saying to your parents' generation, you know, you guys have failed, and now it's up to us to go and get tear gassed and shot on the streets. Okay?
Yeah.
And what is so sad is what often happens when something happens from the heart, from genuine, people always try and hijack it. Okay? And when you saw those kids with their branches and their phones and their bottles of water, you just thank God for their courage and their determination to change this country.
Yeah.
And then other people start hijacking it, and now, anyway, yes,
there's hope.
I have hope, but I think
too.
the hope is coming from the younger generation, trying to hold us
accountable.
Accountable for us being part of the problem and putting up with corruption, putting up with people that you'll vote for because they give you 500 bob.
True story. We are all on the same page on that. I believe there is hope, a lot of hope. I believe where we are going next as a nation is very important to each and every one of us. And I advocate for everyone to use their voice in making sure that we all get there together. Yeah. But maybe before we wind up, is there anything you feel we did not touch on that we can briefly touch on?
I mean, there's so many aspects, but I mean, I think one of the messages I would like to conclude is that as a Christian, as a Bible-believing Christian, I'm just so disappointed is an understatement, is that the church has not taken a stronger stand from the pulpit to say, this is not the way this country should go. We need good governance. We need integrity. We need people caring about other people, not just getting... I mean, I'm involved in some of the, you know, having been on the President's Council and stuff. But I mean, without mentioning any names or anything, I'm involved with a group that's involved with investment in Kenya from another country. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy that is leading the discussions between that country and Kenya in terms of some very exciting developments. I won't mention it, but some very exciting developments in terms of infrastructure and stuff, which we all benefit from, and of course brings in huge employment and stuff. And I don't think it's white savior, please, in this. I think it's genuine investment, okay? And he's in this meeting with some senior people in the government a few months ago. And what the leader of the delegation from the Kenyan government said, you're negotiating with the British government with us on this project. What's in it for you? What are you getting out of it? And he said, I get paid a salary. Well, quite a good salary, but I get... You mean to say that you don't get anything out of these things? He said, no, I don't expect anything. It's my job. I'm here as a person that's involved with finances and know all about this stuff. I'm talking between your government and this government, okay, about this investment and how it will work. I'm just doing my job. And there was sort of a, how come you're not getting anything out of it yourself? Can I change that? No. Sorry, I'm doing my best. Good. But I can't change that. No. But the Gen Zs and your generation might be able to change it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to you.
Good. What legacy do you want to leave behind?
When Jesus was asked what was the greatest commandment, and there was a lawyer that, of course, had so many hundreds and hundreds of laws, he said, love God and love your neighbor. That's what I want my legacy to be. And that's what I've tried to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take this moment to appreciate you for having this conversation. I know we've agreed to disagree at some point, but I want you to know that we are really glad as a network you had this conversation with us. And I just love what you've said. Love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So hopefully, I can't wait to see the feedback from our audience. I can't wait to see what the future has for this country. I will not take your efforts to try and impact other people's life away from you. Anyone that tries to impact a life is a friend of mine. So I will not take that away from you. However, I can only hope that we all move on in the best way all of us know how. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we wind up? Okay. Yes, so Edwin is reminding me of something. When we talk about the African elite, the people who were obviously awarded with some few things here and there, according to you, do you think these were sellouts, or how did they arrive to having this much wealth? Where else the people who fought so hard for independence, majority of them had nothing to their name?
Yeah. I mean, this is a incredibly complicated issue, right? The Mau Mau were instrumental in Britain bringing independence forward. Originally, I understand that they were thinking of independence. Don't quote me on this, but I think from what I've read in history, I think the plan for Kenya sort of before the Mau Mau, or before the real sort of problems of the Mau Mau started was 1975. I think that was the sort of long-term plan. It came 12 years earlier. And the Mau Mau were definitely part and parcel of that. What we now see, Jomo Kenyatta was tried in Kapenguria for managing the Mau Mau, which I think history shows he did not do. He was obviously very sympathetic to the cause of land, okay? But this is my personal opinion, okay? But I think the main issue with him was twofold. One, the violence, and two, the whole question of oathing went against the Kikuyu tradition of how the oathing had gone away from the traditional basis, which was basically a fairly just system under the tradition of the day. This has now been changed. It's all done in secret, and it's becoming more and more complicated. Okay. And the other issue, of course, was that basically the gospel of the Mau Mau was socialist. Okay. And obviously Kenyatta favored a capitalist system. And we see straight away the struggle between Jomo and Oginga. Jomo favored the colonial capital, the capitalist system, okay? And obviously, I mean, human beings are human beings, whether you're black, white, or brown, Lynn, okay? People are always looking what's best for them, okay? And obviously, the new black government came in with Jomo, and I ran a company with James Gishuru. He's Minister of Finance and Defense for a while, okay? They benefited hugely. So basically, it is true that the new independent government of Kenya replaced the white elites with black elites. But now, my question, what would have been the alternative? When we look around Africa, around us, the countries around us, where is there a system of government, socialist, communist, or any other one, that has done better than Kenya? Tell me one. Can you please tell me one? So what was the alternative to Kenyatta? There was a guy, and please, this again, I'm just talking what happened the other day. There was a guy at this Mau Mau conference that said that Kimathi was appointed the first Prime Minister of Kenya by a Kikuyu council in the forest. Okay. Now, my question to him was, if Kimathi had become Prime Minister of Kenya and President of Kenya, where would we be today? And of course, he couldn't answer that question. Okay. And I said to him,
where do you think would be?
Well, hang on. I said to him, where is there a socialist system, okay, that has worked better than what's going on in Kenya today? Mugabe, is that a good example? Omar Bashir, is that a good example? Okay. And of course, he had, but I mean, I don't know what Kimathi would have done if he'd become Prime Minister, but I don't think he would have the government skills to run a nation that Kenyatta had. Okay, so that the fact that human nature is human nature, and let's get this. Human nature is the same, Lynn, whether you're black, white, or brown. Okay, they are black greedy people. They are black incorruptible black people, and they're white people and brown people. Human nature is human nature, irrespective of the color of your skin. We're all out basically for number one, okay? And that's the issue. So of course, when Jomo saw that the socialist system that was central to the Mau Mau story didn't gel with his program, okay? So the only Mau Mau that he really honored was Itote, General China, because as you remember, they tried to murder Kenyatta when he was in detention, Bildad Kagia, later a guy called Chatara, okay? And General China was part of the process, which in a sense saved Kenyatta's life, okay? The guy, the district commissioner up in Lodwar at the time was a guy called Whitehouse. I actually met him once before he died in Lodwar. And he got to hear that they were hatching a plot to try and kill Jomo and took steps to try and protect him, okay? So inevitably, Jomo saw the Mau Mau structure and politics was social, and he was capitalist. So then you get the fight with him and Odinga, okay? So inevitably, human beings the same, whether they're black, white, or brown, you're now in charge, and you have access to buy land. You can do exactly what the white guys did, okay? And we have to live with that today, okay? So, yep, that's part of that issue. But as I've said, please look around the other countries in Africa and say, okay, well, I think this would have worked better for Kenya. I think if we'd forgotten about Jomo and we'd put him in, now we'd be in a better state. And if you can write a novel about that, I'd be very happy to read it.
Great. Another question by Edwin was, are there parts of our cultures that you think we should have kept as Africans that were depicted to be, you know, evil?
I mean, as I said, when I said at the beginning, Lynn, and please remember what I said at the beginning, I said the white missionaries brought in and tried to westernize converts, and that was not right, okay? You've got to deal with the culture and respect the culture. There was so much good in the organized system that you people had back in those days, whatever tribe it was. There were issues, of course, but you had a government system, okay, that basically worked, okay, in terms of loyalty, in terms of integrity, in terms of fidelity in marriage and all the different aspects. You had a system that basically worked, okay? The only one that I would have taken cause with was FGM.
Of course.
Okay? That I would have supported whatever people tried to avoid that, okay? So, yeah, so Edwin, sorry, just give me that question again. Perhaps I've not answered it completely.
No, I think you have. Edwin?
But he was just asking about some of the African traditions and cultures, maybe with coming of Christianity and the westernization that were deemed to be like witchcraft and all that. Yeah, but I think you've answered it.
You know, as I said, so much of the structure was good. You know, witchcraft, I think, now becomes a bit complicated because one of the aspects of witchcraft, and it's the same with religion, I'm sorry, and even sometimes in Christianity, is what witchcraft brought in was fear, okay? So if you didn't do what the witchcraft did, or you did something to offend him, or something happened to remove the curse, okay? If somebody cursed you, okay, to remove the curse. And also, I think what also happened with witchcraft and custom is that it dampened down people that were trying to be innovative. If you try to bring, as a young person, something innovative, even in the way you grew something, or the way you built your house or something, you would be dampened down. No, that's not the way we do it. So I think quite a lot of that tribal structure, there was a lot of good, but I think also the whole aspect of the power of the witch doctor in the tribe kind of dampened down
fear.
Innovation. Young people that were trying to do things better, trying to change things, and I think they felt no way. So it's then things would sort of stagnate a bit. So that I think was sad, because I think if there'd been more freedom, things would have
Been different.
been different.
All right. So thank you so much once again for having this conversation. And as I said, I can't wait to see also the feedback from our communities, our people on the comment section. Anything else you want to add before we wind up?
No, I mean it's been interesting. I mean, as you know, I spent 86 years of my life here. I've committed my life to this country, and the discussion has been interesting, challenging, okay? And I hope I've been able to depict something of our own struggle as people that came out of the colonial system and have tried to give up all our Mzungu stuff. I mean, when I in the middle of the Moi regime, when we lived under a police state, and let's be truthful with that, I suffered under that quite a bit myself. I would go to UK for a couple of weeks for a meeting or something, and I can remember going to the UK after the coup in 1982, and I was away for a couple of weeks. I couldn't wait to get back, to get out of UK. And there I could have, you know, back in 1982, 83, you had to look over your shoulder before you said anything about the government. You know, you had to look around to see nobody was listening to you. I would go to UK and you could say, I think Maggie Thatcher is an idiot. Nobody would care two hoots. And yet, in spite of that, after 2 weeks over there, I wanted to come home. So, I mean, yeah.
All right.